It's now my pleasure to introduce another one of our panels, the Transport Infrastructure Panel. I'd ask them if they could come forward and I'll introduce them as they do. It'll be chaired by Christopher Brown, who's Deputy Chairman of IPA and the Managing Director of the Tourism and Transport Forum. Also Les Wallinga, the Director-General of the New South Wales Department of Transport Infrastructure, which is the new super agency. Les, welcome. Les will be well known to many here as being the former Chief Executive of the New South Wales RTA and also having a pivotal role over pulling together the Sydney Metro project. Dave Stewart, the Director-General of the Department of Transport and Main Roads in Queensland. Dave reports to both the Minister for Roads and the Minister for Transport and directly to the Premier on Urban Congestion Initiatives. He joined the Queensland Government as the Deputy Coordinator General. He's now heading the enlarged department and has a pivotal role over the future planning priorities in the areas of infrastructure for the whole state of Queensland. And John Rogan, Executive Director, Commercial for VicRoads. John has held senior executive roles for almost 20 years in a range of departments across government, including Treasury, Attorney Generals, Planning and Infrastructure. In 2008 he took up the role of Executive Director at VicRoads, one of the great agencies of the state of Victoria. He's responsible, amongst other things, for the management of the CityLink contract. He's also unusual in the sense that he's had experience not just in this state public service but also as Deputy Director General of Transport in New South Wales from 2000 to 2003. For this panel, and I'll hand over to Chris, who's chairing it.
Thank you, Mark. Well, I had thought originally this panel would be the nice right of reply for the states after the federal department speech, but he was way too collaborative, so we'll have to settle just for being a warm-up act for Wild King that follows. So thank you again to our panellists today. I think as we progress through today's agenda, through different parts of the infrastructure equation, it often usually comes back to transport. And three blokes on stage who know the inside outs of the joy of operating transport in a public sector world. Three blokes who've also a lot of experience in partnering with the private sector to deliver those outcomes and living currently through an environment where particularly certainly in New South Wales and Queensland, there's been very recent administrative changes to the structure of those departments, and of course they're all waiting for the new MURDAC regime, so how the federal-state relationships work in transport. That is one of the topics, obviously, we'd focus on, some of the federal-state relationship and also the public-private relationship. And at the heart of it, in a way, guys, part of the reason, and we were joking at the board meeting last night, that infrastructure now, and Brian Tyson made mention earlier in some kind comments about IPA's role, infrastructure now is such a fundamental part of the economy. As Keating used to say, every galah in the pub was talking about microeconomic reform. Well, they're now all talking about infrastructure. To the extent this government, 18 months ago, its major macroeconomic challenge was how to slow down an economy, how to deal with inflation, how to build productive capacity, and of course infrastructure was the answer. A year on, it's how to speed up the economy, how to stimulate everything going, and of course the answer is still infrastructure. So diametrically opposed issues with the same solution. You guys, it falls to you the challenge of moving people around in your own jurisdiction. So to that congestion to start with, and maybe start with you, Les. You've got, would say, in some ways the greatest challenge, and certainly doing that in South East Queensland, New South Wales, changing its entire environment about the way we do land use planning and transport management. You've rolled out your new baby, about to roll out your new baby in the Metro Authority as well. Where are we in the progress report on New South Wales as we get back into the issue of addressing congestion and combining land use planning and transport development?
Oh, thank you very much for letting me start, Chris. Look, I guess before I address the question, when you're dealing with an issue as complex as congestion and the development of a city, we need to set a context and a few assumptions that are pretty important because they influence the way that you need to go forward from a strategic point of view. Mike Nerdak's made the good point about the paucity of strategic planning, and it is true that we're looking for a bit of a paradigm shift in the way we go about things. As far as the context is concerned, human beings have been congregating in cities for 300 or 400 years. The day they started doing that, congestion started to become a problem. and it's going to be around in 400 years' time. The issue for us is that people generally, because of the advantages they get of living in large communities, the networks, the access to employment, access to leisure activities, all of those sorts of things, those significant advantages are going to give them some tolerance level for congestion. And it leads you into the issue of what's an acceptable level of congestion. Some people think that the moment their flow's impeded from an unimpeded flow, you've got congestion. When you talk to economists about it, you're talking about this concept of what's called excessive congestion. And excessive congestion is all of that congestion that where the cost of doing something about it is still less than the actual cost of the congestion itself. So you've got a sensible investment strategy if you can find and isolate those. What we do know from the feedback that comes from our community, what's important to them is, more than anything, they value reliability of travel time to get to and from work. What they're happy about is that able to get in the car at 8:10 and regularly get to work at 9:10 or whatever their travel time is. Consistently in the work we do, that's the strong message that's coming through. So the question is, what's buggering up the reliability? And when you analyse congestion, it's essentially two major components: recurrent congestion, the stuff that occurs at the same time every day because the actual capacity of the networks that you've got can't handle the demand for it. And there's another lot called non-recurrent congestion, and that's where you get incidents out on the network, and it really buggers up reliability. I mean, you get car accidents, you get cargo losses off vehicles, you get storm events. Now, dealing with that quickly, you need the best response you can put together to go out and deal with it. You need to find out about the incidents quickly. You've got to get people on the ground. You've got to get those broken vehicles off the road. You've got to pick up the cargo loss. You've got to stop that errant behaviour that some drivers do when, overheight vehicles blocking the front of tunnels and all of those sorts of things that drive us crazy in 3 or 4 of the peaks every week that we deal. And most governments are putting in strategies and lifting up the level of sophistication of those at the moment. Dealing now with the recurrent congestion, this is where the paradigm shift's really required. And the traditional response in the past has been, let's build a bit more infrastructure, let's try and get a bit more out of the existing regime, see what we can do. But when you look at it from a long-term point of view, you're essentially dealing with 3 moving parts. You're dealing with the type of infrastructure that you're going to provide, the transport infrastructure. Secondly, you're dealing with the way planning and land use develops and the impact that that has on demand. And thirdly, you're dealing with the availability of resources, which is particularly money that you're going to need to make all of this happen and where it comes from. Now, you can do some scenario analysis, and the traditional response to planning in major cities is to sit there and look at the planning and land use equation. Most governments, and we do in New South Wales, every 5 years we do this survey and we find out what our population's doing and where they want to live and where we try and make job employment happen and all of those sorts of things. And then people like me that work in infrastructure agencies come along and say, geez, how am I going to find the money to provide all of this infrastructure? And the gap keeps getting wider. And using private sector involvement, trying to structure projects in a right way is all part of what we need to do. Maintaining our AAA credit rating is important. What we need to do is